Starwalker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, a podcast all about tabletop role-playing games from the perspective of the captain's chair. Welcome to Game Master's Journey Unplugged. Sit with me around the fire as I discuss magic items in the Tyranny of Dragons campaign for Dungeons & Dragons. So join me on the journey. Together, we can become game masters truly worthy of the title. Hello, listener and fellow GM and or player. Welcome to the first Unplugged episode of Game Master's Journey. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. Got a great show for you today. First off, you may have noticed that I am not on board the Obsidian Monolith today. I've disembarked on some Earth-like planet, and I found a beautiful spot in the woods to build a bonfire. It's nice to get off the ship once in a while, and I thought this would be a nice venue to have a little chat. I'd really like to do these Unplugged episodes every once in a while as bonus episodes. And this is going to be a chance for me to explore topics that I wouldn't want to devote a full normal episode to. So, for instance, tonight I want to talk a bit about Tyranny of Dragons, which is a D&D campaign. So this is, of course, a very specific topic. So it doesn't really fit in what I'm trying to do with the podcast and keeping it more general. So that's why I'm doing this as an Unplugged episode. So these will kind of deviate from the normal format a little bit. It just gives me a chance to try different things and let my hair down and have a little bit of fun. But I hope that you will find this interesting and these episodes interesting, even if you're not playing or running D&D or you're not playing or running Tyranny of Dragons. Hopefully this will give you some food for thought for your own games. Now, these Unplugged episodes, one of the reasons I'm calling it Unplugged is because I'm not planning to do the heavy editing on these that I do on my regular episodes, because that takes a lot of time, and I only have so much time in the week to do the various things I need to do. And I would like to put these out for you to have kind of some bonus content, some added content. So every once in a while, you guys get 2 episodes a week. But in order to do that, I can't really intensively edit these as much as I do the regular show. So I thought, hey, I'll call it an Unplugged episode, and it's going to be a little bit more raw, a little bit more off the cuff, and just kind of talking about a topic. I originally thought that these would be shorter than the regular episodes, maybe 15, 20 minutes. Now I'm not so sure. I'm trying not to do as much prep for these. I tend to write my entire episodes. And if you want to know more about that, you can check out my newest podcast, How I Podcast with Lex Starwalker, which I'm doing because I've had some listeners ask me how I do what I do and what kind of equipment and software I use and stuff like that. So I decided that I would do an actual little podcast for that, for people that are interested in that. And I believe episode 3, I'm going to talk a bit about show notes and how I do my show notes and kind of my philosophy about show notes, if you will. So you can check that out if you'd like to know more. But I started preparing for this episode, and I wanted to write some things out just so that I'm not completely rambling and stumbling around when I'm recording, because again, I don't want to do a ton of editing on this. And as I wrote my ideas out, I realized that I had a lot more to say than I thought I would. So this may actually be as long as a regular episode. It may actually be longer than a regular episode, but that's okay because I'm not going to do crazy editing on this. I'm trying some new techniques with my equipment that should help me not have to spend so much time editing. And if it works, I will be able to even put out a longer episode than the normal episodes, and it will actually take me less time to do because I'm not going to be editing every second of the episode. So that's kind of what these are going to be about. So if you have any ideas or requests for topics for the Unplugged episodes or regular episodes, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And I just love to get your feedback in general. So a great way that you can reach me is by email at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. And I would just love to hear from you what you think of the show, any ideas for topics, any questions you have, suggestions of games for me to talk about. Again, if you're suggesting games, just remember what I said at the very beginning of the show, that obviously I have my limits as far as money and time as to how many games I can play and how many games I can run and how many games I can invest in. And obviously, I'm going to focus on games that are the most interesting to me. If I'm ever making the big bucks doing this, then I will happily check out any game that people suggest to me because I'm getting paid to do so. But we're not at that point, or we're not at that point yet. So right now, it's games that I'm interested in, and just some games I'm just not interested in. So obviously, I'm not gonna cover those. But if you have suggestions, feel free to let me know. I may not have even heard about your favorite game. And also let me know what you think about the Unplugged episodes, and if you like these. And the nice thing about these is, they will say that they're unplugged. So if this isn't really your thing, you could skip these, or maybe some people will like these better than the regular episodes. So that way, you can get the episodes you want if you're not going to listen to every single thing. And some people just can't keep up, because my old podcast, GM Intrusions, that was kind of the ancestor of this podcast, I did a lot of bonus episodes. There were a lot of weeks that I had 2 episodes, and I had a lot of listeners that just could not keep up, and they just couldn't listen to that much content. So I get that, but the nice thing about podcasts is they're timeless, right? Or the good ones are. So, but I totally understand that you want to keep up, right? And you want to be current and hear the latest episode and not miss stuff. So I'll try not to overwhelm you. So before I get into the topic tonight, kind of why we're warming our hands on this beautiful fire, I have just a couple things I'd like to mention. If you enjoy this show, I would really appreciate your support. Your donations not only keep this podcast going, but they also help me pay the bills, because this is my job now. This is what I do. So the best way that you can help out is to become a patron of the show. And if you go to the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney and go to the show notes for this episode or any other episode, there is a Patreon button at the very top of the show notes. And just click on that, and it will take you to our Patreon page. And if you don't know about Patreon, it's basically a crowdfunding platform for things like podcasts, where we put out content on a regular basis, and you pledge a certain amount per month, whatever amount you want. And that's how you can help me out a lot. And I have some perks for the patrons. I'm planning to kind of revamp the Patreon in the near future, in the next few months or so. I've got some ideas of some new things I'm going to do with that, and have some new perks and stuff for you. Another way that you can help out is, if you'd prefer to just give a one-time donation instead of a monthly donation, you can use the donate button on the website. And again, you can find everything at starwalkerstudios.com. Just go to the Game Masters Journey page, which is starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney. However, if you're strapped for cash, and believe me, I know how that is, there are still a lot of great ways that you can help out without having to spend a dime. So one thing you can do is you can try a 30-day trial of Audible books, courtesy of Game Masters Journey, and you can find the link to that at the bottom of the show notes. Another thing you can do is to use my Amazon referral link whenever you shop on Amazon. You can find this link at the bottom of the show notes as well. Also, anytime I have something linked on Amazon, for instance, this week in the body of the show notes, I will have links to the Tyranny of Dragons books, and those are referral links as well. And the way that works is you just click that link. It will take you to that product on Amazon, and then you can buy anything. You don't have to buy the thing that I linked. And you can buy whatever you want on Amazon as long as you use that link to get there, I will get credit, and it helps out a lot. And you can use those every time you buy on Amazon, and it's not going to cost you anything except for the time it takes to click that link. And another great way that you can help me out is to leave a review of the show on iTunes and or Stitcher, whichever you use. Just click the iTunes button or the Stitcher button at the top of the show notes, and that will take you directly to the show on iTunes or Stitcher, and you can leave a review. And it doesn't have to be long. You can just leave a few words, but it really helps when other people are looking for podcasts. It helps the show kind of rise to the top the more good reviews we have. And finally, of course, telling your friends about my podcast is a great way to help out, and it helps immensely, because the more listeners I have, the better. And with podcasting, still the number one way that people find new shows is word of mouth, believe it or not. So anyway, that's all out of the way. There's all my my pleas for support for today. And I want to thank you very much for supporting the show. And I want to thank all my patrons and all the people who donate and all the people who tell people about the shows and retweet me on Twitter and share my posts on Google Plus, and all the ways that all of you support me. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right, on to today's topic. So today's topic is magic items in Tyranny of Dragons. So Tyranny of Dragons is the first storyline for 5th edition. So on a previous episode where I talked about the future of D&D, I talked about how Wizards is doing these storylines now that is kind of the focus of their development of the game. So instead of just producing a bunch of random splat books for races and classes and things like that, they have a storyline. And right now they're doing about 2 storylines a year. They may go down to 1 depending on demand and what their customers want. So Tyranny of Dragons was the first of these storylines, and it consists of 2 books, Hoard of the Dragon Queen and The Rise of Tiamat, and I will have links to those on Amazon in the show notes, referral links, as we discussed, if you want to go check those out. And this campaign takes beginning first level characters all the way up to level 16. And you may say, hey, wait a minute, Lex. It says it goes to level 15. Well, that's what they say, but the way the campaign works, they're actually going to be level 16 at the end of the campaign, assuming you give them XP for the last part of the campaign. They'll be level 16. Now, I am going to have a gentleman on the show in a soon coming future episode, and we are going to discuss running long published adventures, or adventure paths as they're called in Pathfinder, like this. And I'm really looking forward to kind of getting into this. I started a couple, 2 or 3 adventure paths in my Pathfinder days. I never got super far in any of them. So Tyranny of Dragons is my first time running a published campaign like this. And so far, I'm having a blast with it. I'm not having any problems at all with it. However, I've had a lot of experience, even though this is my first time doing a whole campaign like this, because when I was doing the Pathfinder ones, if you're familiar with their adventure paths, I ran a little bit of Carrion Crown, like the first chapter of that. I never ran Shattered Star, but I was preparing to run Shattered Star. And then I ran most of the first book of Kingmaker. So when you prepare for one of these, you kind of have to prepare for the whole thing at once, at least in broad strokes, because you're going to want to foreshadow things that are coming up in the future. So if you're only reading the current adventure, you're not going to be able to do that. And I listened to a lot of podcasts about these and how to do it. So I was very well prepared to run these and knew kind of what I was getting into running a published adventure that spans 15 levels, basically the career of your character. And so I've brought all this knowledge to running Tyranny of Dragons, and I found some great resources for Tyranny of Dragons to help me out. And so I haven't had any problems with it at all. However, this is, it's a huge topic. It's something that does have its own skill set as a DM or a GM running something like this. And so I'm really looking forward to talking about it. And these published campaigns, whether you call it an adventure path or whatever you want to call it, they're really great for GMs, especially adult GMs like me, who are busy and may not have the time to spend to build their own world and or develop their own campaigns from scratch. So, this is a way that you can save a lot of time, because instead of having to develop this whole thing from scratch, you get to take what they've done and go from there. And even if you're not too busy to do everything yourself, it can be a lot of fun to take a published campaign and then spend that time you could have spent coming up with your own thing, and instead spend it fleshing out this published campaign and putting your own spin on it, adding your own NPCs, and just really taking it to the next level, which I would argue you should be doing this with a published adventure anyway. Unless you just have to because you just don't have the time, I don't recommend just running a published adventure out of the box, as they say, which is to say with no prep or, doing nothing other tthan maybe reading it beforehand. And I've known DMs that don't even do that, and that is usually not a fun experience at the table for the players. But, you should be taking a published adventure and you should be making it your own. You should be reading through the whole thing, looking for areas that you think are going to cause problems, or looking for things that you don't find super interesting or you don't think your players are going to find interesting, and changing those things and adding your own things, adding in some of your own NPCs or putting your own spin on the NPCs, and, making it into more than what it is, because even the best written adventure in the cosmos is not gonna, it can't be everything to everyone. So you need to take it and make it what you need it to be for your group. So I think doing that and taking a whole campaign that's already written for you and really making it your own, you end up with a much richer experience for everyone than if you would have done the thing yourself. Because again, you can spend the same number of hours, but those hours that would have been spent like going from the ground up, you can instead improve this thing that you're starting with. Now, I think Tyranny of Dragons, especially the first book, gets kind of a bum rap. Some people are really harsh of their criticisms of it, and it does demand a lot of you as a DM. I've definitely seen adventures that demand more. It's not like this is the most demanding thing out there you could run. It's definitely not for a beginning DM, and I think that's a disconnect with a lot of people, is they're assuming that this is for novice DMs for their first campaign, and it's definitely not. When I used to be in the Pathfinder and I would listen to podcasts about the various adventure paths, they would kind of rate them as, how advanced of a GM do you need to be to run this? And like, for instance, the Kingmaker adventure path was usually regarded as something for advanced GMs. This was not something for beginning GMs, and it was not something for beginning players. And I think the same thing with Tyranny of Dragons. And it's just kind of unfortunate the way it came out, because it was, the first of these storylines to come out, and it came out with the release of D&D. And so I think that led to some people assuming that this was for new players and new GMs, and I really don't think it is. That's what the beginner box or the starter box, whatever they call it, is for. Lost Mine of Phandelver is a great adventure for beginning players and GMs. This is not, which is fine. I mean, I'm not a beginning player or GM, so I don't really want to run a 16 level campaign that's made for beginners. I want something I can really dig my teeth into. So I actually, a while ago, I wrote a blog post about kind of my reaction to some of the negative reviews of Tyranny of Dragons and Hoard of the Dragon Queen specifically. I will have this linked in the show notes. Definitely go check it out. Not only to get kind of my spin on this adventure, but also at the bottom of the post, I compiled all of the resources that I am using running it, that I have found on various blogs and websites and whatnot, including basically an errata for the first book, because one of the major problems is comes down to editing issues. And part of this was just the book is not edited as well as it should have been, and so they're just straight up, grammatical issues and punctuation issues, or numbers not being on maps, or the wrong numbers being in the wrong places on maps, things like that. Just basic editing stuff that confuses some people more than others, but is confusing regardless. And then some of it was just due to the fact that Kobold Press, who is the company that developed this campaign, they were doing this at the same time that D&D 5th edition was being developed. So they didn't have, at the beginning when they first started doing this, they didn't have finalized rules for D&D 5e. This was, D&D was still being play tested and refined and everything. So, imagine what they're going through as they're writing this campaign. And, every so often Wizards is saying, oh, hey, we changed this and we changed that. So an example is they have rules, or they mention rules for like perception, like passive perception. And it doesn't make any sense, because Wizards at some point changed the way they were doing that. And the Hoard of the Dragon Queen still has a terminology referring to the previous version of how they were doing perception. I think they called it readiness or alertness, which they don't even use that term anymore. So it's kind of confusing. And, some of it was just kind of Kobold Press, I think, dropping the ball on the editing side of thing. But again, it's kind of understandable, because I don't even want to know how many times they had to revise this stuff just due to changes from Wizards. But a lot of it was just, the rules were changing, and they were doing their best to keep up. And it was inevitable that some things would fall through the cracks. And I think that some people just got too emotional and are just, couldn't deal with these editorial issues and didn't want to take the time to find the corrections and whatnot. And just kind of overreacted to that. And it's like, you got to kind of understand things in their context. It's like, well, would you rather have had to wait 6 months after the game came out before you had an adventure to play? Or would you rather have the adventure now and maybe there's some typos that you got to deal with? But anyway, there are kind of errata by one of the authors of the adventure that he took his personal time to answer people's questions about the various confusing things. And so I have a link to that, and that helps a lot. And then these various blog posts can really be great resources if you're going to run this. So definitely check that out. So again, one of the big complaints about this campaign was the editing issues, is what a lot of them boil down to. And then one of the other big complaints basically boiled down to people just thought this was too much work for the DM to run this campaign. And a lot of these people seemed to think that they should be able to run something out of the box. And again, I don't think you should run a one-shot adventure out of the box. Trying to run an adventure path out of the box is insane. And, Paizo puts out great adventure paths for Pathfinder, and there are a lot of them. And go find any Pathfinder GM out there who has run Pathfinder adventure paths, and I'm sure that they will tell you, oh my god, no, you could never run an adventure path out of the box. And the way Paizo does them is each adventure path comes out in 6 separate softcover books. And most people, I think most GMs who've run an adventure path would say, not only do you need to know that first book inside and out before you start running the thing, you need to have read all 6, right? You can't just even read the first book of the 6-part adventure path and think you're good to go. Like, you need to know the whole thing. So thinking that you can run Tyranny of Dragons just out of the box without any or hardly any prep is crazy. But, the other thing is this does demand a lot of you. I mean, if you look at the adventure paths for Pathfinder, there's a wide scope of how much prep you as a GM need to do. Like, for instance, the Kingmaker adventure path was very much a sandbox, and so it required a lot more prep on the part of the GM, because, instead of saying, oh, well, I know this week they're going to do these 3 encounters and I'll prepare those. It's like, well, they could go anywhere. They could do any of these 20 encounters, and I have no idea which one they're going to do. So I kind of got to know them all. So in that sense, it was a lot more work. And That's how this is. This campaign is very much, you're going to get out of it what you put into it. If you're willing to put the time into it and you're not thinking that this is a shortcut or a cheat to get out of having to do any homework as a DM, then you're going to have a blast and your players are going to have a blast. But if you're just going to phone it in, then it's probably not going to go so well for you. So again, you can check out my blog post. I'll have it linked, and you can get all these resources for the campaign and kind of see my review of the campaign. So all that said, there is one kind of criticism that I have of the campaign, and isn't one of the ones you see a lot in the reviews, and that is that I found it's rather lacking in magic items, especially in the early levels. Going by the book, the PCs will be nearly 6th level before they get any real magic items. Now, this isn't counting consumable magic items like potions and scrolls. There are a few of those, and there is one optional item they can get in one of the optional encounters before level 5, a +1 longbow. But again, that's an optional way of running an optional encounter. So just going by the book, the stock stuff, they're not going to see any real items until level 6. So this was my first adventure with 5th edition running Tyranny of Dragons. And so I just assumed that this was a lower magic edition. And it is in some ways, I think, especially if you compare it to, I think, 3rd edition. I'm not sure about 4th, but 3rd, it seemed like magic items were everywhere. And you had the kind of arms race between the scaling of the monsters as you got to higher CRs and the need for PCs to have magic items. So in 5th edition, we don't have this as much. So I just assumed that it was normal in a 5th edition campaign not to see any magic items until 6th level. However, I then started running Lost Mine of Phandelver, which is the adventure in the beginner box. And in that adventure, the PCs receive a few magic items before they hit level 3, including a +1 longsword. And I just have to say that in this edition, a +1 weapon is actually a pretty big deal. Getting a +1 on an attack roll is a big deal. You don't have the huge scaling of your attack bonuses as you level. In like 3rd edition, you had a base attack bonus that if you were a fighter type, went up by 1 every level. So at 20th level, you had a +20 base attack plus all your other bonuses, where in 5th edition, that is replaced by your proficiency bonus, and the highest that gets is +6. So there's a big difference between +20 and +6. And also your ability scores tend to not be as high, so those bonuses are less. I'm now playing in Princes of the Apocalypse, run by my buddy Dwayne from my Tyranny of Dragons campaign. And that is the second storyline for 5th edition. And in that campaign, we got magic items on our first session before we were even level 2. And in fact, my character got a wand of magic missiles in that first session, which is a crazy powerful item for 1st and 2nd level characters. Hell, we're at 3rd level now, and it's still powerful. If that wand is fully charged and I want to take the risk of losing it forever by using all of its charges, I could, in one turn, in one round, I could shoot 10 magic missiles out of that thing. That's insane for a 1st level character. So obviously, there isn't this thing in 5th edition where you can't have magic items until you're, in your 2nd or even 3rd tier of play. So it's just a weird thing with Tyranny of Dragons. Now, I think after we just discussed a few minutes ago how Tyranny of Dragons was developed at the same time that D&D 5th edition was being developed, so this could be a result of that, and I could definitely see the designers of Hoard of the Dragon Queen specifically saying, well, if we're going to screw this up with how many magic items we're handing out, better to err on the side of not giving out enough than to give out too many and skew the power balance of the PCs versus all the adversaries in the adventure, because it's really easy for a DM to hand out some extra magic items. It's a little bit harder to, after the fact, tell DMs, hey, you shouldn't give out all the items that we tell you to give out. So I imagine that that's probably part of it, or maybe WotC even told them to be very conservative with numbers of magic items, and as the game was developed more and tested more, they realized, oh, hey, you can hand out some items at low levels and it's not a big deal. So I decided, I was going to run this by the book because this was my first experience with the new edition, and I didn't want to go doing a bunch of crazy stuff because I've been nailed in the past, in my earlier days of DMing, by handing out too many magic items. The players get way too powerful, and then I'm either having to scale up all the encounters I come up with by just having lots and lots of monsters coming at them, or I'm having to make each monster more powerful, or I'm having to use monsters of a higher CR than what you would normally use, which can bring other difficulties in. So it just made my job more difficult as a dungeon master because they were overpowered for their level. And it also kind of brought in the thing of, well, I've already given them all this cool stuff. Like, what rewards are there left to give them? All I can do is give them more, better, bigger magic items, and it just spins out of control. So I've learned from past experiences that I want to be really careful what I hand out. And, usually one assumes with a published adventure, you can be pretty safe just going with what they tell you to do. So I saw the lack of items in the beginning as maybe a good thing, just assuming that this was a design decision and that there were good reasons for it. So I started to look for those reasons and tried to interpret this as a good thing that there's no magic items for the first 5 or 6 levels of play. And for one thing, this puts more focus on the characters and their abilities than on gear, which is something I think is really cool. It also allows things, more mundane items like, say, plate armor or half plate armor, to be very valuable things to the PCs. And indeed, in my Tyranny of Dragons campaign, Dwayne's character actually is a dwarf cleric who, from the very beginning, was saving his money to get a suit of full plate armor. And that's really cool. And if I was throwing out all kinds of magic armor right away, that wouldn't have even been a thing, because it's like, well, I can get magic armor that's as good or better than that. However, now that I've been running the game for quite a bit, we just finished our 17th, I believe, session last week. It seems like 5 levels is a really long time to go with no more magic items. And luckily, my players have been really cool about it, and I haven't had anyone really complain about the fact that there hasn't been any magic items. But, we played 17 sessions now. And if I was going by the book, they would have last week seen their first magic item. So the 17th session, we played like 4-hour sessions. Someone would have finally gotten a magic item, not counting consumables. And so that seems kind of not enough, right? So after seeing the Lost Mine of Phandelver is throwing out magic items left and right, and so far Princes of the Apocalypse also is doling out quite a few magic items like right away at first level, I decided that I could risk adding some magic items to this game without screwing anything up too bad, as long as I, took it easy and didn't go crazy with it. Also, another thing is Tyranny of Dragons is a really brutal campaign. Now, ironically, Lost Mine of Phandelver, for being a beginner box adventure, is actually pretty brutal too, especially the very first adventure. I've run that twice now, and both times resulted in a TPK. Now, I will point out that one or both of those groups only had 3 players, so maybe that was it. But I've seen online a lot of other people saying that they ended up with TPKs with that adventure too. So that's kind of an aside, but it seems like an odd choice for an introductory adventure to have it ending in TPKs. I think there's something got screwed up there somehow in the design of that. But Tyranny of Dragons is a super brutal campaign. The first session, the first scenario in a campaign is another one that has ended in a lot of TPKs, and in fact really takes kind kind of a dance on the part of the DM for it not to be a TPK. You got to really run it, quote unquote, the right way for it not to end in a TPK. And you know, of course, you have to have players that aren't totally dumb or do totally dumb things. But it continues on from there. There are many encounters in the campaign that are very challenging, and if they're not handled in just the right way, could end up in the death of one or more characters or the whole group. And the kind of the culmination of the campaign is very deadly at all, or as well. So I've warned my players from the very beginning, you know, you dying is a very real possibility. Not just, you know, you dying sometime in the campaign, but you dying at the end of the campaign, in the, you know, at the climax. So just be prepared for that. So because it is so deadly, I don't think that I'm going to hurt things too much by giving out a few more magic items, as long as I don't go crazy with it, like I said. And hopefully it's not going to break the game if I give the players a little bit of a leg up. So what I've been trying to do with the items that I add is I've tried to make them very flavorful, so that I'm not just adding stats and numbers to the game, but I'm adding character and flavor, and which is what I really like about magic items. You know, it's the old thing of the warrior who, you know, has the sword with the name, and people know the sword as well as they know the warrior, like that kind of thing. Like having the PCs able to have items that kind of help define their character and become part of the thematic elements of their character. I really like that. I'm a big fan of intelligent items too, of course. I've also tried to make most of the items that I add into the campaign that weren't already there, I try to make those more defensive in nature, because I would rather, if I'm going to enhance the abilities of the PC beyond what the adventure is anticipating, I would rather enhance their defense than their offense. I don't really want to have them just obliterating encounters left and right, because that's no fun. But if I can improve their chances of survival a little bit, then I think that's a good thing, especially in this campaign because it is so brutal. And I've also been very careful not to add items that are too powerful for the party's level. So luckily, the DMG has some really great tools to help you when you're deciding what magic items to give out to your players. And, you know, whether you're like me and you're running a published campaign and you're going to add some of your own stuff to it, or if you're running your own campaign, to kind of have an idea of how much is too much. So the first thing you can take a look at is the magic item rarity table on page 135. And what this does is gives you appropriate character levels for the different types of magic items based on rarity. So this is, if you play Magic, this is very familiar to you, the idea of rarity. So we have 5 rarities of magic items in the game. We've got common, uncommon, rare, very rare, and legendary. So the guidelines are really simple. So common items are appropriate to characters of first level or higher. Uncommon items for characters first level or higher, again. Rare items for characters 5th level or higher. Very rare items for characters 11th level or higher, and then legendary items are appropriate for characters 17th level or higher. So again, if you kind of stick within these guidelines, then it's going to prevent you from handing out a single item that is individually too overpowered or overbalancing. So for instance, my group right now, they're all level 5. So up to this point, any items I've added have been uncommon. They have common. There's actually only 3 items in the game right now, at least as far as in the DMG, that are common. And those are your basic potion of healing, not like extra healing or whatever, just the lowest end potion of healing is common. The potion of climbing is common. And then spell scrolls for cantrips and first level spells are common. Those are the only common items I have found in the game. And so kind of a tangential thing, but I hear people talking a lot about, you know, should I allow people to buy and sell magic items in my world. And the way I've decided to handle it is, and I think this is what's recommended in the DMG actually, is I allow players to find common items. So they can find potions of healing, potions of climbing, and spell scrolls for first level or level spells or cantrips. Those you could potentially just find for sale somewhere. It's got to be a good sized city, and even then it's not guaranteed, and supplies will be limited, so they can't buy 20 potions of healing or whatever. But anything above that is just generally no. You can't find that for sale, and you're also going to have a hard time selling it. And I would really recommend looking in this part of the DMG around page 135, and it has some ideas for if you're going to let your players sell magic items, how to handle that. And it's a really cool system where they basically have to look for a buyer, and they make a roll, and that helps you determine whether or not they find the buyer, and if so, how good of a price the buyer will give them, and whether the buyer is going to be shady and try to do something underhanded and stuff like that. It basically turns it into a little adventure, just trying to sell an item. Now, something I've decided for my game is I do want the possibility to be there to buy and sell magic items at higher levels, because one thing I've noticed, especially with Tyranny of Dragons, is they get tons and tons of treasure as far as like gems and coins and art objects and things that are worth money. And unless you're going to run a business or you're going to buy a castle or something like that, there's not really a lot to spend money on in this game, especially when you're talking large amounts that high-level characters are going to accumulate. And it's like, kind of what's the point of having all this money if there's nothing you can use it for? So kind of the fix I've come up with for this, and also a way to allow character or players to kind of more customize the items they have, instead of just being able to take the items I give them or that they find in hoards or whatever, to actually be able to say, I want this particular item for my character, is I've let them know that a possibility is going to the City of Brass on the Plane of Fire. And that is a place where you can actually buy magic items. Now, they're, of course, not necessarily going to have every single item you want, but they will have a pretty good selection, and you will be able to buy those. And it's a great way to have a good sized money sink to get rid of some of that coin they have, to allow them to sell items if they need to, and also to allow them to buy a very specific item if they really want something specific for their character, without you having to just have them, oh, look, you found this item you really want in a dragon's hoard, which is really silly, right? Oh, well, that's convenient. Unless you have the god put it there or something, which is still pretty silly. And the other thing I like about this is that's a whole adventure, right? It's not like you can just in your downtime go to the City of Brass and buy some magic items. That's going to be an adventure or a series of adventures where you need to travel to the Plane of Fire and deal with the City of Brass. And that's the kind of adventure I'd love to run. I think that would be a lot of fun. So that's why I did it that way. I'm like, hey, if you guys decide you want to go to the City of Brass to get some magic items, I am all for that. Just give me some warning so I can cook up some cool stuff. So there's another very useful guideline on page 133 of the Dungeon Master Guide in the using the treasure hoard table section. And so this is more of a guideline of how many items to hand out. Okay, so the chart on page 135 is a good guideline for like what power level they should be getting at a given level. And this is an idea of how many you should be handing out. And so what this says is, over the course of a typical campaign, a party will find treasure hoards amounting to 7 rolls on the challenge 0 to 4 table, 18 rolls on the challenge 5 to 10 table, 12 rolls on the challenge 11 to 16 table, and 8 rolls on the challenge 17 and up table. And these are referring to the hoard tables, not the individual treasure tables, because the individual treasure tables don't have magic items on them. They're just coins and stuff and gems. So you can, use this and look at those tables and look at what kind of items you would get from each table. And it'll give you kind of a ballpark idea of, at a given level, how many items they should have, because those tables are very well designed so that each table corresponds with that tier of play, right? So you're not going to see super powerful items in the challenge 0 to 4 table, right? So it works really well. So if you have a 5th level party, well, they've seen some 0 to 4 tables, and probably all 7 of those by this point, and then up to 18 on the 5 to 10 table. So if you've got a 5th level party, you could do a maximum of 7 rolls on the challenge 0 to 4 table, or maybe a few less to allow some of those in the future, and then maybe 1 or 2 on the challenge 5 to 10 table. So it's a good ballpark, and I actually like that about this version of the game. 3rd edition was very like, this is exactly how many items of this type they should have at this level, and that's just getting too granular and too limiting. I like more of giving me an idea, and then I can kind of play within that and find the sweet spot for my particular campaign. So again, this is going to give you a good idea of the number and power level of items that would be standard, and then you can decide how far you want to deviate from that, whether you want to have a more high-powered campaign or a more low magic campaign. You can kind of go from there. So that's what I've been doing. I've added a few items, and for the most part, I'm really happy with the items I've added. I don't think I've added anything game-breaking, although there's one that I added that might be, if not game-breaking, at least game-changing, and that is a necklace of prayer beads, which I've came up with that a long time ago. I've been wanting to hand that out for a while because I have a cleric in the party, and it's a really cool cleric item. I like items for spellcasters that give them access to spells that they can use so that they can have more versatility and they don't have to memorize or prepare those spells. So I really like stuff like that, and the players like them too. And now we have a druid in the party, so either one of them could use them, although they're really flavored for the dwarf cleric, but doesn't mean the druid couldn't use them if they wanted to. But when I was rolling that, you roll to see how many of these beads you have, and I rolled the maximum. And I decided it would be more fun to have a wide variety of spells instead of having multiple ones of the same spell. So they ended up getting like all the possible ones, and some of those are pretty insane, like Planar Ally. Being able to cast Planar Ally once a day when your 5th level is pretty sweet. And they've actually already used that once, or are going to use it once, and we're using it as a way to have a story reason for the fact that 2 of the player characters aren't going to be there next week, and one of the player characters that has missed a few sessions is going to be back. So I'm actually using the Planar Ally as a way to make that all happen in world and make it make sense and make it actually be something kind of cool. So I'm having fun with it, and that's what I like about some of those higher powered magic items is you can really spring off some great stories from them, which is kind of the whole point, I think. So yeah, so there's a discussion on that. Again, I just kind of was thinking about this the other day, and I thought it would be fun to talk about this on the show, but it's not super relevant to everybody probably. So I thought I'd do this Unplugged episode. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, especially if you're running an adventure yourself, a published adventure, and maybe you decided to add magic items, how that worked out for you. I'd really love to hear from you if you've actually run Tyranny of Dragons and what you thought, or played, and what you thought about the lack of items in the basically chapters 1 through 5 of the first book. Over half of the first book, there's no real magic items, and how you felt about that, and if you ran it, did you add some in? And if you did, how'd that go for you? I'd love to hear about that. Well, that's going to wrap up our first Unplugged episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to reach me, please email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Follow me on Google+. Just look for Lex Starwalker, and follow me on Twitter at Lex Starwalker. Please visit the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com/gamemastersjourney, and there you can find all kinds of helpful links. You can find links to all the great ways that you can support the podcast, including our Audible books free trial link, a link to our Patreon if you want to look into becoming a patron of the show, our donate button, and our Amazon referral links. You can find that all there, as well as links to our show on Stitcher and iTunes. If you'd like to leave a review, I would really appreciate that. And finally, you can find a link to my Google Plus community for this show. Would love it if you join us there and join in the conversations. We have a lot of fun. So I will be back with a regular episode on Tuesday. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.